Putin says Russia can provide long-range weapons to others to strike Western targets. Oh, here we go. Nice. Going into a full-scale war over fucking Putin's ambitions on Ukraine and everyone else's inability to fucking put this conflict to rest while simultaneously preserving the lives of as many Ukrainians as possible. I love that. It's great. Let's do it. Fuck it. YOLO. Ban for ban.
Кто-то считает возможным поставлять такое оружие в зону боевых действий для нанесения ударов по нашей территории и создания проблем для нас, то почему у нас нет права поставлять наше оружие такого же класса в те регионы мира?
To supply weapons for the same type all around the world where they can be used to launch strikes on sensitive facilities
по чувствительным объектам тех стран,
of the countries that do it to Russia.
которые делают это в отношении России. То есть ответ может быть
The answer may be asymmetric. We will think about it.
Мы над этим подумаем. И в конечном итоге, если
And
мы видим,
ultimately, if we see that these countries are being drawn into a war against us, and this is their direct involvement in the war against the Russian Federation, then we reserve the right to act the same way. In general, this is a path to a very serious problem. Is this what you meant by multipolarity? Yeah, dude, multipolarity implies that, like, you know, everyone is fucking killing everyone. Like, there's no way that there could be any sort of collaboration. There's never any collaboration between America and the EU, for example. Like, it's great.
U.S. officials say Russia will begin air and naval exercises within the coming weeks, and this is the first time that Russia has held air and naval maneuvers in the Caribbean since 2019. The exercises are expected to last all summer, culminating in a worldwide naval exercise in the fall. CBS News national security correspondent David Martin joins us now from the Pentagon. David, first of all,
what do you think about the projected surges in voting in favor of Trump now that he's a convicted felon? That's not what? Nobody's like, I wasn't going to vote for Donald Trump, but now that he's a convicted felon, I'm voting for him. What the fuck are you talking about?
What do we know about these exercises, where they're taking place, what nations are involved?
Well, the Cuban government has just announced that 4 Russian warships will arrive in Havana on June 12th next week for a 5-day port visit. So we can expect these exercises to begin by the end of this month. And in addition to those 4 Russian naval ships, we can expect to see Russian long-range bombers patrolling down the East Coast. Now, Russian ships have made port calls in Cuba before, and Russian long-range bombers have flown down the East Coast before. What makes this noteworthy is that it is the first time in 5 years that Russia has done both at the same time.
You know, David, as people...
Why is Cuba agreeing? What the fuck do you mean, why is Cuba agreeing? Do you guys not understand the relationship between America and Cuba? Like, I don't know if you guys know this, but America has had crippling sanctions on Cuba since the Cuban Revolution. We backed the dictatorship. They lost. And we haven't stopped punishing the Cubans since. Like, they treat this fucking tiny island nation like the goddamn, like the biggest villains of all time for the crime of having a socialist revolution. Okay? And hurting American interests in Cuba. America would much rather have Cuba remain a sugar plantation and a tourism destination for the American mafia, or just, you know, owned and operated by the American mob. And they really don't like that it didn't happen like that. It didn't continue being like that. We gave a lot of weapons to the Batista dictatorship at the time, which was significantly more bloody than anything else. Then we kept trying to destroy Cuba by obviously directly attacking Cuba at times, trying to assassinate Fidel Castro, and also and also having a sanctions regime on Cuba. Completely unacceptable. There is no world in which America's actions there are justifiable. All things considered, Cuba has still been able to thrive in spite of it all. The main export of Cuba is U.S. The Cubans who leave and send money back to our family, the fuck you on about? What the fuck is this up with this chat glazing up Cuba? What the fuck is up with like what the fuck is up with Cubans who come to the United States of America and shit on Cuba? Like did you address any of the things that I just mentioned? No. In what planet is it justifiable to fucking blockade and sanction an entire nation? Like what are you talking about? You just said they thrive. No way they have thrived. Yes, they have thrived, all things considered. They have. You have to analyze a country and its prospects by looking at all of the hurdles that they've overcome. When you look at it from that framework, all of a sudden, America being the wealthiest nation on earth, and yet still having a massive homelessness crisis, still not having free healthcare, still not having free college education, having some of the worst literacy rates in comparison to other OECD nations, having the worst home ownership rate in comparison to other OECD nations, having the worst healthcare outcomes across the board in comparison to other OECD nations, losing out to Cuba in terms of life expectancy is a massive fucking failure. But nobody wants to have that conversation. So you just keep talking about GDP. A metric that favors the United States of America. It's ridiculous. It's like thinking that the economy is doing good because the market is doing good, when the market, or at least like a stock, will perform better when they lay off hundreds of people. Okay, does that mean that the economy is moving in a positive direction? Hundreds of layoffs occurred, downsizing occurred, they eliminated redundancies, and now the stock prospects for a particular corporation is better. Hundreds of people lost their jobs in the process. If you hyper focus on the numbers on that in that regard, you will be duped into believing that things are going fine. It's the same principle.
Folks are making a comparison to Kennedy, to the sphere of influence with Russian missiles in Cuba, now Russian naval exercises and military exercises. Talk to us about the timing of these exercises. And
Cuba has a shot that heals lung cancer. Yes, Cuba does have a vaccine for lung cancer. A shot that cures cancer, I'm calling bullshit. First of all, mRNA vaccines are working on that as well. But Cuba has had a lung cancer vaccine for quite a while. People with lung cancer in the United States of America could not go to Cuba to get it for the longest time. They had to illegally go to Cuba and try and get it before if they have a likelihood of getting lung cancer. Yeah, we have HPV vaccines, and HPV causes cancer too.
To that point, whether it poses any threat to the U.S.
Well, U.S. officials say that on one level, this is simply the summer exercise season kicking off. But they also believe that this is partly a show of displeasure by Putin for American support of Ukraine and for all the NATO exercises that have been going on in Europe. This presence of 4 Russian ships in the Caribbean off the east coast of the United States just pales in comparison to the size of the exercises the U.S. military has been conducting with its NATO allies in Europe. So this is not considered in any way a direct threat to the United States.
Where's that one chatter who was shitting on Cuba? Where's he at? I want to hear more from him about how awful Cuba is and how we have to have a sanctions regime on Cuba. Where'd he go? It's ridiculous. I promise you, I have more smoke for the current Turkish administration than you do for the Cuban administration. And yet, when America fucks over Turkey and engages in actions that are worse overall for the Turkish population, I will fucking openly call that shit out, because I'm not some dumb fuck blinded by some weird loyalty to the United States of America. You said, didn't Obama remove sanctions during his presidency? Yeah, what happened? I don't know if you know this, but there was another president that came after him, and then another president that came after him. And no, Obama didn't remove all the sanctions during his presidency. Obama developed a pathway towards removing sanctions and normalizing relations with Cuba, which was great, only to have it reversed with Donald Trump and continued under the Brandon administration as well. So go ahead. What's your answer to that? Also, even before Obama, what's your answer to the sanctions regime that was in place and the embargo that was in place for however many decades at this point? Nobody's loyal to this shit country, man. Okay, but like it seems like you're defending, or rather refusing to acknowledge, a key part of my argument. I agree sanctions are the culprit, but Cuba's not doing it according to its citizens. No, I'm not saying Cuba is doing great. I'm saying Cuba is thriving in consideration with the sanctions. All things considered, Cuba is doing great. Cuba should be looking like Haiti right now. If America had its way, Cuba would look like Haiti. That's it. That's my point. It's doing well in spite of the United States. No country could survive in this current global economy with the same level of sanctions and the embargoes that America is placing upon them. Okay? That's it. Having said that, as far as restrictions on certain civil liberties, not LGBTQ stuff, obviously they're more woke than we are on that front, but restrictions on like free speech, for example, is because Cuba is also in a consistent defensive posture against the largest global superpower on the fucking planet. Cuba is a tiny island. This does not justify people being imprisoned for speaking out against the government or whatever. But if you think for even a brief moment that America has not implemented similar restrictions on free speech, like the Sedition Act, as a matter of fact, in times of war, you would be wrong. So that also goes back to America's restrictions. This is why I have more criticisms for Chinese restrictions than I do for Cuban restrictions on that similar vein. It's still bad across the board, but there's a real reason for why they exist. The consequences are still damaging nonetheless.
David, do we expect that the Biden administration will respond in any way to these exercises?
Well, you can be sure that the U.S. military is going to be tracking this exercise very closely, sending up jet fighters to intercept the long-range bombers and shadowing those ships, in particular the submarine. I just checked, and it turns out that right now in the Caribbean, the only thing the U.S. Navy has there are autonomous sail drones. but the east coast of the United States is just bristling with
Joel Seaverud, thank you for the 25 gifted subs.
air bases and naval bases, and the U.S. could surge ships and aircraft out if in this exercise and somehow in some way turned threatening.
David Martin at the Pentagon for us. Thanks, David.